He stepped into a quiet cafe for a simple cup of coffee, and froze when a little boy with his exact green eyes ran past him calling Claire, his ex, Mom. In one breath, the life he thought he controlled shattered. Liam Carter pushed open the door of the small cafe expecting nothing more than a few minutes of quiet and a cup of strong coffee to clear his head after a morning crammed with negotiations. As the celebrated CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, he lived in a world of sharp suits, sharper deadlines, and a constant buzz of voices demanding pieces of him. This cafe was his escape, an unassuming corner untouched by corporate urgency, a place where he could exhale without anyone analyzing the meaning behind it. His dark hair was still damp from the drizzle outside, and his green eyes scanned the room automatically, searching for a free table. He moved with a quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of believing he controlled every variable in his life. That illusion shattered the moment he looked toward the counter. Claire. Her blonde hair was tied into a loose knot, a few strands falling against her cheek as she leaned over the register, smiling politely at a customer. Her blue eyes were gentle and warm, the same eyes that once softened every sharp edge inside him, the same eyes he had seen in too many dreams since the day he walked away from her. For a second Liam thought exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Claire wasn't supposed to be here, in his city, in his line of sight, in a moment where he felt too tired to guard himself. She looked almost the same, yet not entirely. There was a quiet weariness in her posture, something fragile resting beneath her smile. Liam took an involuntary step forward before stopping himself, stunned by the rush of emotion he hadn't anticipated. He hadn't decided whether to approach her or walk back out before she noticed him when a small voice pierced the low hum of the cafe. High, soft, and unrestrained, it cut through him with a force he couldn't explain. Mama. The word wasn't directed at him, yet his body reacted as if it had importance, and he turned instinctively toward the source. A little boy, no older than 2, stood near the end of the counter holding a small toy car in one hand, the other stretched toward Claire as he tried to get her attention. His dark hair fell in soft waves across his forehead, but it was his eyes, bright green, unmistakably green, that made Liam's heart stutter violently inside his chest. Those were his eyes. Not similar. Not close. Identical. Liam couldn't move. The room blurred except for the child, who now noticed him and stared with the unguarded curiosity only toddlers possessed. The boy's head tilted slightly as if studying him, as though something about Liam felt familiar without the need for explanation. Claire turned at the sound of her son's voice, lifting him effortlessly into her arms, whispering something soothing as she tucked him against her shoulder. That was when her gaze shifted and collided with Liam's. Shock flickered across her features, followed by a cascade of emotions, uncertainty, hesitation, something almost like fear, and then an expression he couldn't decipher. She swallowed, adjusted the boy's position on her hip, and stepped toward him reluctantly, as though pulled forward by a force she had hoped to avoid. Liam. She said softly, his name passing her lips with a familiarity that cut into him far deeper than he expected. I didn't think I'd ever see you here. Her voice held a note he remembered too well. Something warm. Something wounded. He glanced at the child again, at those impossibly green eyes framed by dark lashes that mirrored his own childhood photographs. A strange pressure built in his chest, a blend of dread, shock, and something terrifyingly close to hope, though he didn't dare name it. He forced himself to speak, though the words rasped out unevenly. Is he yours? The question hung between them, heavy and delicate. Claire hesitated for a breath before nodding slowly, her fingers stroking the boy's back in a soothing rhythm. The child, meanwhile, lifted his head to look at Liam again, tiny brows drawing together in a thoughtful expression that felt painfully familiar. Everything inside Liam tilted. His perfectly balanced world, built on discipline, logic, ambition, lurched dangerously, as though one small boy with green eyes had pushed it off its axis. He wanted to ask 100 questions, wanted to step forward, wanted to step back, wanted to understand how this child existed and why Claire hadn't told him. But he couldn't find the right words, couldn't form anything coherent through the tidal wave crashing over him. Claire looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. His name is Oliver. Oliver. The name slammed into him with unexpected force. A stranger shouldn't feel this familiar. A child shouldn't look so much like him. And yet here he was, a little boy calling Claire Mama, with Liam's eyes shining in his face. In that moment, one truth began to rise inside Liam, quiet but undeniable. Nothing in his life was under control anymore. And nothing would ever be the same again. Liam followed Claire to a small corner table near the window, though he wasn't entirely sure how his legs carried him there. His mind felt split in two, one half frozen with disbelief, the other desperately trying to stay composed as his world rearranged itself around the tiny boy now seated on Claire's lap. Oliver clutched his toy car and tapped it rhythmically against the table, glancing at Liam with a seriousness far too old for his 2 years. Sunlight poured through the window, illuminating the green in his eyes so clearly that Liam couldn't look away. It was like staring into a mirror he didn't know existed. Claire looked different in this quiet moment, still beautiful, still familiar, but with something heavier woven into her expression. There were faint shadows under her eyes, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights and not enough help, and a softness in her posture that hadn't been there when she was 22 and dreaming with him about the future. Her hands, though gentle, carried a certain weariness, and Liam found himself wondering how long she had been carrying life on her shoulders alone. So, she began, forcing a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is a bit of a shock, I guess. A shock, Liam repeated quietly, unable to stop staring at the child. That's one word for it. Oliver perked up at his voice, tapped the car twice, then leaned toward him with an expression of cautious curiosity. It hit Liam somewhere deep in his chest, a place he had deliberately kept empty for years, thinking it was easier that way. He forced himself to look up at Claire, trying to steady his thoughts. "Claire," he said slowly, "please tell me what's going on. Who is he?" She glanced down at her son and brushed her thumb over his cheek. "He's Oliver," she said softly, as though the name itself carried its own truth. "He's my son." The words landed between them with a dull weight, and something in Liam's stomach tightened painfully. He swallowed, struggling to phrase the question without sounding accusatory. "And his father?" Claire flinched almost imperceptibly, and that tiny movement confirmed what he already feared. She looked away, focusing on a spot outside the window, as though the passing pedestrians held the answers she didn't know how to give. "You left," she said finally, her voice quiet, controlled. "You were so focused on your career, on becoming the man you always wanted to be, and I didn't want to be the anchor holding you back. You made it clear that we weren't part of your plan anymore." Liam's chest tightened as her words resurfaced memories he had buried. Their breakup had been quick, logical, efficient, everything his corporate life demanded. He hadn't cried. He hadn't fought. He had simply walked away, convinced he was making the mature choice, the responsible choice, the choice that would let each of them chase their separate futures without resentment. He never imagined she had been carrying something far heavier than heartbreak. "You didn't tell me you were pregnant," he whispered, struggling to keep his voice steady. "No," she admitted, finally meeting his gaze. "I didn't." "Why?" The single word came out rougher than he intended. Claire breathed in slowly, steadying herself. "Because you told me, Liam, that your life had no space for unpredictability. That you needed control, focus, discipline. I knew what that meant. I knew a baby would have changed everything for you. And you were already leaving. You had one foot out the door before I even realized how far apart we'd grown." Liam felt as though someone had punched the air from his lungs. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, but the truth was a blade he couldn't outrun. He had been selfish back then, ambitious to the point of blindness. He had believed he was being noble, letting her go so she wouldn't suffer from his absence, but in reality, he had never stopped to consider what she truly wanted or needed. "So you chose to raise him alone," he murmured, staring at Oliver, who now pressed the wheels of his toy car against Liam's arm, testing him the way children do when deciding whether a stranger is safe. Claire exhaled shakily. "I didn't choose it. It just happened. And once it did, I gave him everything I could." Liam's gaze softened instinctively as Oliver smiled at him, a small, innocent smile that didn't carry any of the pain adults hold. He reached out slowly, unsure whether it was allowed, and Oliver placed the toy car in his palm without hesitation, as though offering something precious. The moment hit Liam like a wave. His throat closed, his eyes stung, and he had to blink several times before he could speak. "He looks like me." Claire nodded. "Yes. Every day. And you never thought I deserved to know?" Her lips trembled, not from defiance, but from exhaustion and fear. "I was terrified, Liam. Terrified that you'd demand custody, or that you'd resent him, or that you'd blame me for ruining your life. And then as time passed, it felt too late. I didn't know how to reach out without reopening everything." Liam leaned back, overwhelmed, his pulse thundering. He had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with less emotional turmoil than this single conversation. He wasn't angry, not truly. What he felt was deeper, rawer, something tangled between regret and longing. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "I don't care how messy it would have been. I had a right to know." Claire's eyes glistened, but she held his gaze. "Maybe you did. But I had to protect my son. And at the time, I honestly didn't believe you wanted us." Oliver reached forward again, patting Liam's hand with a sweet, clumsy gesture that melted the last of his defenses. Something in that tiny touch rewired him from the inside out. Liam wasn't sure what this meant for his future, or for Claire's, or for the little boy who didn't understand any of the chaos swirling around him. But one thing was already clear, pounding through his veins with startling certainty. He wasn't walking away this time. Liam spent the rest of the day wandering through the city as though he had stepped into someone else's life. The noise of traffic and the blur of people passing by felt distant, muted beneath the storm of thoughts crashing in his head. He had always prided himself on clarity, on knowing what he wanted, where he was going, and how to get there. Now, for the first time in years, he felt utterly unmoored. Oliver's face kept rising in his mind, those unmistakable green eyes, the tentative smile, the instinctive trust with which the boy had placed his toy car in Liam's hand. It was impossible not to feel the shift inside himself, a shift that frightened him with its intensity. That evening, Liam once again found himself standing in front of the café without remembering the walk that brought him there. The lights inside were dimmer now, the crowd thinner, the quiet more pronounced. Claire nearly dropped a tray when she saw him come in, but she recovered quickly, offering him a cautious nod before returning to her work. Oliver sat in a small wooden high chair near the counter, tapping his palm on the tray and humming to himself. When he noticed Liam, his eyes brightened and his little body straightened with recognition. He lifted both arms in an unmistakable gesture, wanting to be held. The gesture shook Liam to the core, but he moved toward him slowly, unsure if he had the right. Claire noticed the hesitation, wiped her hands on a towel, and approached with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You can pick him up," she said softly, and the gentleness in her voice felt like a fragile bridge she wasn't sure could hold their weight. Liam lifted Oliver into his arms with a mixture of awe and fear, holding him carefully, as if afraid he might break. The little boy fit against him naturally, resting a small hand against Liam's chest and tugging curiously at the fabric of his suit. Liam inhaled sharply at the warmth of that tiny body, at the trust so freely given. He wondered how many moments like this he had missed: first steps, first words, first fevers, first laughs, and the grief of those lost years hollowed him out from the inside. Claire watched them, her fingers twisting nervously in her apron. Finally, she pulled out a chair. "Sit," she said. "We should talk." Liam sat with Oliver still perched comfortably on his lap, the boy fascinated by the buttons on his shirt. Claire took the seat opposite him, her expression a careful mix of vulnerability and resolve. He noticed lines around her eyes he'd never seen before, not signs of age but signs of life lived under pressure, of nights spent awake, of worries carried alone. "I didn't hide him from you to punish you," she began quietly, keeping her gaze lowered. "I know how it must have felt today, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry. But when I found out I was pregnant, you were already slipping away. You talked about your future in a way that didn't include me, and certainly not a child." "I was wrong," Liam said immediately, surprising them both. "I thought I was doing the right thing by letting you go. I thought I was sparing you from a future tied to my work. I didn't realize I was running from something I actually wanted." Claire blinked, taken aback. "You never said that before." "I never had to face what I lost," he replied, brushing a hand gently over Oliver's tiny shoulder. "Until now." The honesty between them stretched taut, thick with everything they hadn't said 3 years ago. Oliver babbled in the background, tapping his toy car against the table, oblivious to the trembling emotional ground beneath the adults beside him. Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice trembling despite her attempt to stay composed. "Liam, I need to know something. What do you actually want now? Not in theory, not in anger, not out of shock. What do you want?" Liam looked at her, then at Oliver, then back again. He had made countless decisions in his life under pressure: mergers, acquisitions, international expansions, but nothing had ever felt as heavy or as real as the decision forming now. "I want to know him," Liam said, his voice steady. "I want to make up for whatever I can. I want to be in his life. Not just as a visitor or a distant figure, but as his father." Claire's lips parted in surprise, fear flickering in her eyes. "And what does that mean for me?" she whispered. Liam held her gaze. "I'm not here to take him from you. I would never do that. I want to be part of his world, not steal it. You're his mother. You've done an incredible job raising him alone. I'm not erasing that." Her breath shook as she nodded, relief and uncertainty tangled together. "But Claire," he added gently, "I don't want this to be temporary. I don't want to disappear again. I want to be here, for him, and, if you'll let me, for you too." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down despite her effort to stop it. "I'm scared, Liam. I built a life that doesn't fall apart when someone leaves. I don't know how to trust that you won't break us again." Liam looked at Oliver, who was now leaning against him sleepily, small fingers curled in the fabric of his jacket. That simple act, the instinct of a child to rest against him, felt like a silent vow he didn't deserve but wanted to earn. "I can't erase the past," Liam said softly. "But I can build a different future." Claire held his gaze for a long moment, searching for cracks, for empty promises, for echoes of the man who walked away years ago. But what she found instead was something steadier, someone changed by the sight of a little boy with green eyes calling her Mama. Oliver yawned then, nestling his face into Liam's shoulder with absolute trust, and that tiny gesture answered a truth neither adult dared to speak aloud yet. Things would never return to what they once were. They could only move forward, into something new, and maybe, just maybe, something better. Claire closed the café early that night, something she rarely allowed herself to do, but the emotional weight of the day pressed so heavily on her shoulders that she couldn't imagine smiling through another hour of service. Liam offered to walk her and Oliver home, and although hesitation flashed across her face, she nodded, adjusting Oliver against her hip before stepping out into the cool evening air. The sky was shifting into twilight, city lights blinking awake as the streets grew quieter. Liam walked a half-step behind her at first, unsure whether he was welcome at her side, unsure of anything except the certainty that he needed to stay close enough not to lose sight of them again. Oliver reached his arms toward him after only a few minutes, twisting in Claire's embrace with irresistible insistence until Liam lifted him. The boy settled with surprising ease against his shoulder, resting his cheek against Liam's collarbone as though he had done it 100 times. Claire watched the scene with a mixture of tenderness and unease, her steps slowing as she processed how natural the sight looked, Liam carrying the child she had raised alone since birth. She wondered whether fate was cruel or merciful for allowing this moment to happen now, after so many days she had wished for help and so many nights she had convinced herself she didn't need it. They walked in silence for several minutes, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but thick with unspoken truths. Finally, Claire broke it, her voice small. "You can't just step in and out of his life, Liam. If you're here, you have to stay. He'll get attached too quickly." She hesitated before adding, "He already is." Liam looked down at the boy sleeping against him, Oliver's tiny fist curled near his chest, his breath warm and steady. "I'm not planning on stepping out," he said quietly, and the seriousness in his voice made Claire glance at him sharply. "But it's more than that," she cautioned. "You have a life built around schedules and assistants and world travel. Do you really understand what it means to be a parent? It's not something you can outsource or put aside when it's inconvenient." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Claire, I know what my life has been, and I know it hasn't made room for anyone. But that doesn't mean it can't change. I'm not pretending I have the parenting part figured out, not even close. But I'm willing to learn. I want to learn. And I want to be there every day for him." She crossed her arms, though more in protection than defiance. Wanting isn't always enough. Life gets in the way. People change their minds. Promises break. Her voice wavered. "I can't let that happen to him." Liam felt the impact of those words more deeply than she intended. He shifted Oliver carefully into his other arm and stepped closer, softening his tone. "Claire. I know I broke us once. I know I walked away from something important without understanding what I was losing. But this, him, it's not something I can turn my back on. I'm not that man anymore." She studied him, searching for signs of the ambition-obsessed version of him she had once loved and feared. But she didn't see that man in front of her now. She saw someone older, steadier, humbled by the sudden realization that life had handed him something precious and fragile. When they reached her apartment building, a modest brownstone with peeling paint and a narrow stairwell, Liam felt another wave of guilt wash over him. He had been living in luxury penthouses while she had been climbing these narrow stairs with a baby in her arms, carrying groceries, strollers, stress, and loneliness without anyone to help. The thought knotted something painful inside him. Inside the apartment, the space was small but clean, filled with soft colors and well-loved toys. A few framed photos of Claire and Oliver hung on the wall, capturing birthdays, messy smiles, first steps. Liam stared at them, struck by the reality he had missed. Claire busied herself with preparing a bottle, avoiding eye contact. "Claire," he said softly, unable to hold it in. "How did you do this alone?" She paused, her hands tightening around the bottle as she closed her eyes. "I didn't have a choice," she murmured. "Sometimes I was exhausted. Sometimes I cried in the shower so he wouldn't hear me. Sometimes I was scared I wouldn't be enough. But when he smiled, or reached for me, or fell asleep in my arms, it made everything worth it." Liam felt something inside him crumble and rebuild all at once. Watching her speak, watching the strength in her voice tremble but never break, filled him with both awe and regret. She wasn't just someone he had loved once, she was someone extraordinary, someone who had survived heartbreak and motherhood with nothing but determination. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For all of it. For leaving. For not being here. For not knowing." She finally looked at him, her blue eyes filled with a mixture of pain and softness. "You didn't know," she whispered. "But the part that hurts is that you didn't look back to see what you were losing." He wanted to say he would never make that mistake again, but words felt too fragile. Instead, he gently laid Oliver in his crib, lingering for a moment as the toddler shifted, sighed, and curled his little fists near his face. The sight pierced him with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt for anyone before. Claire watched him from the doorway, her defenses wavering as she saw how naturally Liam's presence fit into the room. She didn't want to let herself hope, yet hope seeped in anyway, fragile and dangerous. When Liam straightened, he moved back toward her slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said. "But I want to be part of his world. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of yours again too." Her breath caught, uncertainty flickering through her features. "It's not that simple," she said softly. "I know," he answered. "But I'm not afraid of complicated anymore." Her eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted again with a vulnerability that made his chest tighten. "Then don't run this time," she whispered. "I won't," he promised, and for the first time in years, he meant something with every part of himself. As he left the apartment that night, he paused in the hallway, placing a hand over his heart as if to ground himself. He could still hear Oliver breathing softly behind the door, still see Claire's eyes full of unspoken questions and tentative hope. He knew then that his life was no longer divided into chapters of success and ambition. There was a new story unfolding now, one he didn't control but desperately wanted to belong to. And he would fight for it, no matter how hard the next pages would be. Liam woke the next morning with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, though it settled uncomfortably in his chest like a weight he needed to carry with both hands. He sat at the edge of his bed staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, realizing for the first time how empty the view felt. All the things he once believed defined him, success, power, independence, now stood in sharp contrast to the small apartment he had left behind the night before, the one filled with toys, tiny socks, framed photos, and the gentle breathing of a little boy who shared his eyes. He no longer saw his achievements as triumphs. They looked more like walls he had built around himself to keep out the parts of life he didn't know how to handle. He spent the morning distracted in meetings, barely hearing the voices of board members as they discussed quarterly projections and market strategies. His mind wandered to Oliver's sleepy face, the way he had melted into Liam's arms with such natural trust, the warmth of that tiny hand clutching his shirt. For years, Liam had convinced himself that emotional distance was strength, but one night with his son had exposed the truth: distance had only made him weaker, emptier, hollow in ways he hadn't dared examine. Before he could talk himself out of it, he postponed the rest of his afternoon appointments and left the office early. His driver looked startled when Liam told him he didn't need a ride. He wanted to walk. He needed the time to arrange his thoughts, though every step toward Claire's neighborhood felt like a step deeper into the unknown. He wasn't just facing her, he was facing everything he had avoided confronting for the past 3 years. When he reached her building, he hesitated at the foot of the stairs, not wanting to intrude or overwhelm her. He had promised her he wouldn't run, but he also knew she needed proof that he meant it. So he took a breath and climbed, knocking gently on her door. A moment later, it cracked open and Claire's face appeared, startled but not displeased. She wore a soft sweater, her hair loosely tied back, her eyes tired in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or sleep deprivation and everything to do with the emotional storm he had stirred. "Liam," she said cautiously. "Is something wrong?" "No," he answered. "I just wanted to see you both." Oliver squealed from inside the apartment before she could respond, his little feet pattering rapidly across the floor. He appeared beside her, arms raised in immediate demand, and Liam lifted him without hesitation. The child wrapped his arms around Liam's neck, pressing his cheek against him with an affection so pure it made Claire's breath hitch. She stepped aside, motioning them in. Once inside, Liam noticed more than he had the night before. The small cracks in the furniture. The thinness of the walls. The thrift store dishes stacked carefully in the kitchen. The evidence of Claire stretching every dollar to give Oliver a stable life. He felt guilt tighten around his ribs, but he didn't let it consume him. Instead, he carried Oliver to the couch where the boy climbed onto his lap and began showing him his favorite picture book, pointing enthusiastically at animals while mispronouncing half their names. Liam listened as though every word were critical. Claire watched from the kitchen doorway, arms folded, guarded yet softening with every second. He doesn't normally warm up to people this fast, she admitted quietly. Liam's gaze lifted to her. He's perfect. Her throat tightened at the sincerity in his voice. They spent the afternoon together, something that felt both strange and natural. Liam learned how Oliver liked his apple slices arranged, how he insisted on lining his toy cars in a perfect row, how he giggled uncontrollably when someone blew on his belly. Claire caught glimpses of Liam she had forgotten existed, the gentle smile, the quiet patience, the way he listened fully, the way he softened when no one was demanding excellence from him. As evening fell, Claire cooked a simple dinner, half embarrassed because she had nothing extravagant to offer. Liam insisted on helping, though his attempt to chop vegetables nearly resulted in losing a fingertip. Claire laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with how unfamiliar it felt, and for a moment it was as if they had stepped backward in time, into a version of themselves that had never fractured. After dinner, when Oliver grew drowsy, Claire carried him to the bedroom to change him into pajamas. Liam lingered in the hallway, watching quietly through the open door. The sight of Claire gently tucking the blankets around their son struck him with overwhelming force. She had done this every night without him. She had carried fears and hopes and exhaustion in silence. She had kissed scraped knees and soothed sleepless cries while he chased ambition across continents. When she came out of the room, she found him leaning against the wall with his head bowed. She touched his arm gently. "Liam, are you okay?" He looked at her with eyes that no longer hid anything. "How did I not know what I was missing?" She drew in a slow breath, unsure how to answer. "Claire," he continued, voice low, unsteady, "I don't want to be someone who visits occasionally. I want to be someone who wakes up for him at night. I want to be there when he learns new words, or when he's sick, or when he starts school. I want to be part of the picture on your wall. Not just a ghost who appears suddenly and disappears again." Her heart fluttered with fear and longing. "Liam, you're talking like you want us back." He stepped closer, eyes searching hers. "I do. But not for the sake of fixing the past. For the sake of building something new." Claire shook her head slowly, her eyes shimmering. "I don't know if I can trust that. You left once. And when you did, I broke in ways I didn't know I could. I had to put myself back together piece by piece. I'm scared that letting you in again will destroy everything I've built." "I know," he said softly. "And I'm not asking you to trust me instantly. I'm asking you to let me earn it." Silence stretched between them, thick with unresolved pain and emerging hope. Then Claire whispered something she hadn't meant to say out loud. "He looks at you like he knows you." Liam's eyes warmed, softening. "I feel the same way." She looked at the closed bedroom door, then at him, and something inside her shifted, a tiny fragment of the wall she had built cracked open. Not enough to let him in entirely, but enough to allow possibility. "Stay for a while," she said quietly. Liam nodded, and they sat together in the dim living room, not touching, not speaking, just sharing the same small space in a way that felt like the beginning of something fragile and extraordinary. For the first time in years, Claire didn't feel alone. And for the first time in his life, Liam felt like he had found something worth fighting for. Liam's promise to earn their trust became more than words over the next weeks. It reshaped every corner of his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. He reorganized his schedule, delegated responsibilities he had once hoarded, and made space in his meticulously regimented days for things that could not be measured on spreadsheets: morning visits before Claire left for work, afternoons spent pushing Oliver on the swings at the neighborhood park, evenings sitting on the worn-out couch reading the same picture book until Oliver's eyelids drooped. What surprised Liam most was how natural these moments felt, as though fatherhood had been an instinct lying dormant inside him, waiting for the right spark to wake it. Oliver quickly grew attached to him, the bond forming more firmly with each passing day. At first, he toddled hesitantly toward Liam, unsure whether this new presence was permanent. But soon the hesitation faded, replaced by pure joy. When Liam walked into the café, Oliver squealed loudly enough to make customers turn their heads, then barreled into his legs with unsteady steps. The child's trust was a fragile treasure, and Liam treated it with reverence. He learned how Oliver liked being rocked when overstimulated, how he hated the vacuum cleaner but loved water, how a soft hum against his temple soothed him quicker than any lullaby. Claire observed all of this with a mix of gratitude and fear. Part of her softened with every gentle gesture Liam made, yet another part, one stitched together from the remnants of their painful breakup, remained guarded. She had spent 3 years building armor around herself, and now it felt as though Liam was peeling it away piece by piece simply by showing up, by keeping his promises, by caring in a way that felt too sincere to ignore. Still, she reminded herself that sincerity didn't erase history. She needed consistency, stability, and certainty before she could let herself believe in him again. Then one evening everything almost collapsed. It was late, after Oliver had gone to bed, and Claire was finishing dishes when Liam's phone buzzed with an alert. He glanced at it, expecting an email, but the screen exploded with notifications bearing headlines he never wanted Claire to see. Someone, a disgruntled investor, a jealous competitor, or perhaps one of the board members he had recently angered, had leaked information to the press about his sudden involvement with a previously unknown child. Worse, the article hinted that Claire had appeared out of nowhere with a baby in an attempt to extort Liam for money or leverage. They painted her as a manipulative single mother, questioned the validity of the child's paternity, and speculated whether Liam was being tricked. The moment he saw Claire's expression shift from confusion to horror, he wished he could smash the phone to pieces. "What is this?" she whispered, snatching the device from his trembling hand. As she scrolled, her face drained of color. "They're talking about me. They're talking about him." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Liam felt his stomach twist with a sickening mix of anger and guilt. "I'm so sorry," he said, stepping toward her, but she backed away. "Claire, I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone. I swear I've done nothing to put you in the spotlight." "What do you think your life is, Liam?" she shot back, tears burning in her eyes. "Everything you do is in the spotlight. You walk into a cafe and somehow that becomes news." She ran a hand through her hair, pacing. "I told you from the beginning, my biggest fear was losing control of our life, of Oliver's safety. And now the world knows his name, his face, everything." "They don't know his face," Liam insisted. "I'd never allow that. This is just gossip, baseless gossip." "But gossip spreads," she said sharply. "Gossip grows teeth. And I can't protect him from that." Liam's heart hammered in his chest as he reached for her hand. "Let me protect him too." But she pulled away, the hurt too deep and too fresh. "I don't know if I can trust that. I don't know if your world and mine can mix without tearing something apart." The fear in her voice sliced through him with brutal clarity. Claire wasn't angry because of the article alone. She was terrified, of losing her son, of losing the safe life she had built, of repeating the heartbreak he had caused years ago. Liam saw the walls she had started lowering now rising again, thicker and colder than before. "Claire, please," he said quietly. "Don't push me out. I won't let anything happen to him. I'll bring lawyers, security, whatever it takes. I'll make sure no one comes near you. I'll protect both of you." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time the emotion behind them wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. "Do you hear yourself? Lawyers, security, you're talking about a world I never wanted. A world I tried to keep my son away from. And I'm trying to keep him safe," Liam said, his voice rough as he fought to stay calm. "I didn't ask for the public to know. But now that they do, I can't just ignore it. If I don't act, things could get worse." Her voice softened, trembling. "I just want peace, Liam. I want a normal life for him. I'm scared that being close to you means he'll never have that." The silence that followed was suffocating. Liam stepped back, exhaling a breath that felt like it cut through his ribs. "If you want me to leave for tonight," he said, "I will. But please don't shut me out completely. I meant what I said, I'm here. I'm staying. Even if you need space, I'm not running." Claire looked at him with eyes full of conflict, torn between the trust she saw growing in Oliver and the fear growing inside herself. She didn't tell him to leave. She didn't tell him to stay either. She simply nodded weakly, and Liam knew it was the closest to permission he would get. He walked out of the apartment with the weight of the world on his shoulders. For the first time since discovering he had a son, he feared he might lose both Claire and Oliver again, not because he wanted to leave, but because his world had intruded on theirs with a violence he couldn't control. As he stepped into the night, Liam made himself a silent vow. He would not let this be the end. He would protect them, no matter how high the cost. And he would prove that the man who walked away 3 years ago no longer existed. Liam barely slept that night. He lay awake in his penthouse, surrounded by silence that felt more like an accusation than a refuge, staring at the ceiling as headlines replayed in his mind like a storm he couldn't outrun. He had spent years cultivating control over his career, his image, his decisions, but none of that mattered now. All the power in the world meant nothing if he couldn't shield Claire and Oliver from the chaos that had spilled into their lives. By sunrise he had already spoken to his legal team, his security consultants, and his public relations advisors, all of whom offered solutions but none of whom could soothe the ache in his chest. They saw this crisis as a problem to manage. For Liam, it was deeply personal, a threat to the fragile trust he had been rebuilding. When he arrived at Claire's apartment later that morning, the exhaustion on her face mirrored his own, though hers was edged with fear he couldn't bear to see. She let him inside without a word. Oliver ran toward him as usual, arms stretched and face bright, oblivious to the tension thick in the air. Liam scooped him up immediately, holding him close as if anchoring himself through that tiny heartbeat. Claire watched them with a pained expression, wiping her palms on her jeans as if trying to rid herself of nerves she couldn't shake. "I contacted a lawyer," she said quietly as she closed the door. "I need someone who can help me understand what protections I have. Because if reporters start digging, if they show up here, I don't know what my rights are, or what Oliver's are." Liam nodded, grateful she was taking steps to protect herself but shattered that she felt she had to. "Good," he said softly. "I already assigned security to your building. They won't bother you. No one will get close without your permission." Claire's shoulders stiffened. "Liam, this is what scares me. My life wasn't supposed to be something that required security teams." "I know," he whispered, shifting Oliver to his other arm. "I didn't want this either. But I will fix it." She let out a bitter laugh, not cruel but hollow. "Fix it? Liam, this isn't a bad quarterly report. You can't make this go away with a press release." The words hit harder than she intended, and for a moment the room fell into heavy silence. Liam knelt on the floor, setting Oliver down among his toys before he stood and faced her fully. "You're right," he said quietly. "I can't undo what happened. And I can't pretend my life isn't complicated. But I can stand between you and the consequences. I can shoulder the ugly parts so you don't have to." Her eyes flickered with emotion, fear, longing, frustration, something else she didn't have a name for. "That's not what I'm asking," she said in a low voice. "I don't want you to protect me from your world. I want a life where we don't have to fear it." "And I want that too," he replied. "But right now we're at war with a narrative that paints you as something you're not. I can't ignore that." She paced the living room, arms crossed tightly. "I just need stability, Liam. I need to know that Oliver and I aren't walking into something that will crush us." He followed her with his gaze, taking in every detail, the strain around her mouth, the trembling in her hands, the way her breath came quicker when she thought of what might happen if the situation grew worse. Finally, he stepped closer, but not so close that she felt cornered. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Tell me what would make you feel safe." Claire stopped pacing and looked up at him, blue eyes shining with vulnerability. "Proof," she whispered. "Not just that you want to be in his life, but that you're willing to make changes for him. For us. I need to know that if I let you in, you won't leave again." He exhaled slowly, understanding that this wasn't just about the scandal anymore. It was about the wound he had left in her 3 years earlier, the wound that still hadn't fully healed. "Then let me show you," he murmured. "Not in words. In actions." She studied him for a long moment, searching for shadows of the man who once chose ambition over her. What she found instead was a sincerity so raw it made her chest ache. She nodded once, cautiously, as though giving him permission to continue. Later that afternoon he made the boldest decision of his career. He walked into the headquarters of his company, a towering building of steel and glass that symbolized everything he had built, and informed the board that he was stepping down as CEO. Not temporarily. Permanently. The room erupted in disbelief, outrage, confusion, but he stood firm, the image of Oliver sleeping against his chest the night before burning in his mind. He didn't want a life that devoured his time and left nothing for the people he loved. He wanted a life that allowed him to show up, fully and consistently, for his son, and for Claire, if she ever let herself believe in him again. The press caught wind of his resignation within hours. Headlines exploded once more, but this time the tone shifted. The narrative changed. Liam wasn't being manipulated by a single mother. He was a man choosing fatherhood over corporate power. Public sympathy began to sway, and conversations transformed from scandal to admiration. It didn't erase the damage, but it softened it. When Liam returned to Claire's apartment that evening, she noticed immediately that something in him had changed. His shoulders were lighter, his eyes clearer, his presence calmer. He stood in the doorway with a quiet certainty she had never seen in him before. "What did you do?" she asked, uneasy but curious. "I resigned," he said. "I'm starting something new. Something that won't take me away from the people who matter." Claire stared at him, stunned into silence. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the man she had always hoped he could become, but never dared to expect. "You did that, for him?" she whispered. "For him," Liam said softly. "And maybe, someday, for you too." Her eyes filled, but this time not with fear. She wiped them quickly, turning away, overwhelmed by emotions she wasn't ready to reveal. Oliver toddled into the room then, babbling and holding out a book for Liam to read. Without hesitation, Liam scooped him up and carried him to the couch, settling into a moment that felt startlingly natural. Claire watched them from the doorway of the kitchen, her heart caught in a tug-of-war between caution and hope. She didn't know what the future would look like yet, but she felt something shift, something warm and terrifying growing in the space where anger used to live. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not just with Liam beside Oliver, but with Liam beside her as well. Liam arrived early the next morning, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a small bag of pastries from Claire's favorite bakery, the one she had mentioned in passing weeks ago but never expected him to remember. He knocked softly, mindful that Oliver might still be asleep, though the faint hum of a cartoon through the door told him the toddler was already awake. Claire opened the door wearing a soft t-shirt and loose pants, her hair slightly messy, her face bare. It struck him how beautiful she looked like this, unfiltered, unguarded, real. She blinked in surprise at the pastries and coffee, then stepped aside to let him in, her expression softer than the day before but still carrying delicate caution in its corners. Oliver squealed when he saw Liam, abandoning his stuffed elephant and barreling across the room with outstretched arms. Liam caught him easily, lifting him into the air while the child shrieked with delight, and something warm filled the apartment, dissolving the lingering tension like sunlight through fog. Claire watched them with a quiet smile that faded almost as quickly as it came, replaced by contemplation. She still had decisions to make, boundaries to define, fears to face. But seeing Liam here, consistent, gentle, reliable, made those fears easier to hold. They settled into a relaxed rhythm that morning, eating breakfast at the small kitchen table while Oliver loudly demanded bites from each plate. Claire noticed something different about Liam today, a steadier presence, as though the decision he made yesterday had stripped away years of stress and ambition worn like armor. When he reached for Oliver's sippy cup and wiped the juice from the toddler's chin, his movements carried a natural ease that made Claire's heart twist with unexpected longing. After breakfast, they walked to the park. Oliver ran across the playground, laughing as he navigated the small slide with unsteady bravery. Claire sat on a bench, watching with folded hands, while Liam stood nearby ready to catch him each time he stumbled. The scene felt almost domestic, almost ordinary, the kind of afternoon families had every weekend without realizing how precious it was. But for Claire, the ordinariness itself felt fragile, something she didn't dare claim as hers. Eventually Oliver tired himself out and fell asleep in his stroller, his small fists tucked beneath his chin. Liam and Claire walked side by side in the pale afternoon sun, the silence between them no longer heavy but tentative, like a space waiting to be filled with truth neither had spoken yet. "I read the article about your resignation," Claire finally said without looking at him. "They're calling it the biggest leadership shakeup of the year." Liam let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "I'm sure they are. That's huge." She glanced at him, searching his expression. "I didn't expect you to actually go through with it." "I didn't do it for publicity," he said calmly. "I did it because I don't want my life to be something that pulls me away from the people I care about. I want balance. I want presence. I want to build something on my own terms." "And you think that will be enough to protect us?" she asked, not accusing, simply seeking truth. "No," he answered honestly. "Nothing will ever erase the attention completely. But I can build a life where the noise doesn't drown us. I can create a world where we feel safe. Not perfect. Not untouched. But protected." Claire nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The wind brushed her hair across her cheek, and Liam resisted the instinct to tuck it behind her ear. She looked young and tired and hopeful all at once, and the sight of her like this stirred something tender in him that he hadn't felt since before their breakup. They reached her building and paused at the steps. The moment felt like the quiet before a shift, something subtle but irreversible. Claire turned to face him, her hands resting lightly on the stroller handle. For the first time since he re-entered her life, she looked at him without guarding anything. "Liam," she said softly, "I know you're trying. And I see the man you're becoming. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without making promises you can't keep." He nodded, meeting her gaze with steady patience. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of letting you into his life and then losing you again. I'm scared of letting you into mine and remembering what it felt like to love you. I've spent so long teaching myself not to rely on anyone that I don't know how to stop. And when you show up with all this certainty, it overwhelms me." Liam's chest tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Claire took a breath and continued, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But I also see how you look at him. I see how he lights up when you walk into the room. I see the way you carry him, talk to him, protect him, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter to me. Or that it didn't make me want something I've been too afraid to want for a long time." Her voice cracked slightly. "I want a family, Liam. I want stability. I want someone who doesn't leave when life gets hard. But I need you to understand that if we try again, if we really try, this time isn't just about us. It's about him. It's about the three of us." Liam felt something inside him settle, a certainty he had never experienced in business or ambition or success. He stepped closer, not touching her, simply closing the space enough that she could feel the sincerity radiating from him. "Claire," he said quietly, "I don't want to be a visitor. I don't want to be a ghost from your past. I want to build a life with you. I want to watch him grow up. I want to wake up in the same home, eat meals together, argue, laugh, cry, whatever real life looks like. I want all of it. Not because it's easy. Because it's ours." She inhaled sharply, the vulnerability on her face so open it made his heart ache. "Then don't rush me," she whispered. "And don't disappear." "I won't disappear," he said. "And I won't rush you. We move at your pace." At his pace. Not mine. It was the first promise he had ever made that felt both terrifying and freeing, and she looked at him for a long moment, searching for any flicker of doubt. She found none. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took his hand. The touch was soft, almost unsure, but it was enough to send a quiet jolt of hope through both of them. Liam closed his fingers gently around hers, careful not to grip too hard, as if holding something precious and delicate. They walked inside together, hands still intertwined, Oliver sleeping peacefully between them in the stroller. And for the first time since their worlds had collided again, the future didn't feel like a storm waiting to break. It felt like the beginning of a home they would learn to build, one day, one choice, one fragile step at a time.